level. You may have heard that the senator has proposed legislation to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level, putting his weight as majority leader behind the growing movement to root out systematic oppression and racism. Now he is helping to ensure that our democracy will not leave unanswered the insurrection that we saw on January 6th. And if that isn't enough, he is working on a legislative package to fast-track funding for physical infrastructure, and we'll get an update on that today. Expansions of tax benefits, child care, education, health care, and programs to address climate change. I am deeply grateful to welcome America's Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer.
Thank you, everybody. And first, let's have a round of applause for your great assembly members. She does a great job here in your assembly district. I can tell you, because I keep an eye on Albany, what a great job she does up there as well. So she's doing it both ways. Now, I have about an hour, so I'll speak only for 5 or 6 minutes and then just open it up to questions and comments. This really helps me, and I thank all of you for coming. I'm the majority leader. I have a lot to do in Washington. But the best way I can do my job in Washington is stay in touch with people and hear directly what their concerns are. I will walk away from this meeting more knowledgeable and more able to do my job than when I walked in, because I'm going to learn from you and not only tell you what I am working on, but also hear from you what you want me to work on. And every time I go to a meeting like this, I come away with a new idea or two. So I appreciate that very, very much. I'm going to quickly tell you just one thing about my January 6th, which will give you some idea of where I believe we should be headed as a nation. Now, January 6th could be described, at least from my point of view, by the opening line in Charles Dickens' novel, A Tale of Two Cities, the best of times, the worst of times. You may remember that January 5th was our election day in Georgia, where we had 2 Democratic senators. If they won, we knew we'd get back the Democratic majority. Well, I was very nervous. I stayed up all night, watched the results. Tuesday night bled into Wednesday morning. I'm on the computer at 2 a.m. What's the results in Chatham County? How many African-American turnout was there in DeKalb County? Finally, at 4 a.m. in the morning, it's clear that we've won. And we would gain the Democratic majority. I would replace Mitch McConnell as the majority leader. So my first reaction, of course, was just joy, just unmitigated joy. Every one of you I know has had strong goals in your lives, personal, family, maybe it's professional, maybe it's business. And when you achieve it after a long travail, logs on the path, detours along the way, you feel wonderful, and I felt joy. But immediately, almost, I had a second reaction come upon me, strongly and quickly. It surprised me with its strength and speed. And I tried to find the right word, and a few days later I arrived at it, and I call it awe, A-W-E. Not in the sense my teenage daughters used to use it, gee, Dad, that movie was awesome. But rather in the biblical sense, when the angels see the face of God, they tremble in awe. And I was almost trembling, realizing the huge responsibility placed on the shoulders of our Democratic majority, thin though it was, and of course on my shoulders as their leader. And I'd say those responsibilities, those imperatives, fell into 3 categories. The first, of course, was substance. So much to do that hadn't been done in the past that we had to make up for. Dealing with the fundamental issues and premises of our society, like climate change, like economic inequality, like racial injustice, like perfecting our democracy, which had withered over the previous years, and so many other issues. The second responsibility was sort of political. And that was, so many voters say, doesn't make a damn bit of difference who I vote for. Nothing changes. We had a unique opportunity to show them real change in the union. We campaigned on delivering vaccines, delivering checks, getting children out of poverty with a child tax credit. We could produce those things, hopefully. But the third responsibility was the most serious of all. and I call it almost a moral responsibility. You probably asked yourself the same question I asked myself. How could 74 million people vote for such a despicable human being as Donald Trump? And I don't care if you're a liberal or a conservative, Democrat or Republican, he is a vile man. He is dishonest. He is divisive. That's what he loves to do, just divide, people fighting with each other. He's a racist. And he always appeals to the dark side of human nature, which he's very good at, unfortunately. How did they vote for him? And I realized that for too many Americans, they no longer had faith in the American dream. We are a bright, sunny, optimistic country, or have been. But in the last 20 years or so, a sourness has overtaken our land. And people don't have faith in that American dream. If you ask the average American, what is the American dream to you? They'd say, put it simply, nothing fancy. They'd say it means if I work hard, I'll be doing better 10 years from now than I'm doing today. My kids will be doing still better than me. When people don't believe that, they can turn to a demagogue. And that's what they did to some extent in 2020. But if we didn't have a bold, strong vision, middle class and people struggling to get to the middle class don't expect us to snap our fingers and make all their troubles go away. But they expect to see progress and hope. And our mission, moral, was to restore that progress and hope so they would never turn to the demagogue like they did in 2016 and almost did in 2020. So those were my feelings, joy but awe. I drive down, I can't sleep, get in the car at 7:30 in the morning, drive down to Washington, get on the floor of the Senate for the first time as the putative majority leader at 1 p.m. We're counting the votes, as you may remember. And within an hour, before I'd even given my first speech, a police officer in a bulletproof vest with a submachine gun strapped across his waist grabs me firmly by the collar. I'll never forget that feel. He says, "Senator, you're in danger. You gotta get out of here." He had explained to me what the danger was. You may have seen this because the video cameras, the security cameras overhead caught it, and they showed it at the impeachment trial, first time I saw it. But they show me walking out the Senate chamber door, turning to the right, I'm walking briskly with a police officer on either side, go through the door, don't see me for 20 seconds, and then 20, 25 seconds later, we're running out the door at full speed. I was within 20 feet of these insurrectionists, horrible people, these racist insurrectionists bigots. And one of them had a gun, and two of them blocked off the door. Lord knows what would have happened. One of them was reputed to point at me and say, "There's the big Jew, let's get him." Worst of times. Now we're getting back to the better of times. They've arrested about half of those who invaded the Capitol, but more importantly, we've gotten the vaccines out, we've gotten the checks out, passed the ARP, which helped so many aspects of American life and New York life in particular. Believe me, when I have a little say, I design things to be very helpful to New York. And we have this big bold, vision ahead of us, which I think can restore that hope, that sunny American optimism, and that's what we're fighting to do right now. So that's all I'm going to say, because I'd rather spend the rest of the time answering your questions. So I'll let Rebecca recognize people, and feel free to tell me what you have to say.
We're going to start on this side of the room and work our way over. Take a few from this side, the back, and then the front. Who's on the board of the Lenox Hill Neighborhood House, who is 91 years old, and the former chair of the Feminist Press, the oldest feminist book publisher, and a resident.
Wow, that's great.
How are you this morning, Senator?
Thank you.
Could you tell me what is the status of the return of the state and local taxes reductions?
Yes.
Known as SALT?
Yes.
In the imminent future, definitely
try to pull
according
this.
to reconciliation.
Thank you. This was one of the nastiest things done in the Trump tax cuts of 2017. It was aimed at the blue states because, you know, the hard right, which ran that thing, hates government. And they don't like the fact that the blue states, like New York and others, are more generous in terms of education, and in terms of helping people who need help, and in terms of housing, and in terms of feeding and everything else. And traditionally, we've always said, let the states decide on what level of government they want, but we won't double tax them on it. Okay, so they repeal this. It is very, very bad for New York. And one of my top goals in this upcoming reconciliation bill, the second part of it, which will deal with taxes, not the bipartisan, you know, there are two parts to it. I'm going to speak for a minute on that because I'm sure it'll come up. I have, 10 or 15 of my members who really believe strongly in bipartisanship. They come from redder states. If you're from West Virginia, I always tell my colleagues we've got to walk in the other person's shoes, even when you disagree with them. So if you come from a really red or purple state, you go home and say, I'm just for the Democratic agenda. That doesn't work. So you say, I'm bipartisan. Okay, fair enough. Now, when we can be bipartisan, we try to do it. And there are parts of this infrastructure bill that you can do in a bipartisan way, particularly the traditional infrastructure, which Republicans will vote for. Roads, bridges, highways. And this fifth bill has more of that than we've ever had before. But they won't pay for it because they don't want to increase taxes even on the highest end of people. And they won't do anything on climate or on family or on human infrastructure, as we call it, which is just as important as the hardcore infrastructure. So the first part of this bill deals with that, but it won't deal with taxes. The second part of the bill, which is called the Build Back Better plan, which Joe Biden put together, will deal with taxes. And it is my goal, and I am optimistic we can achieve it, to eliminate the state and local, the cap on SOLs, the state and local deduction, because it's devastating for New York. And this idea that it affects only wealthy people is bull. More than 3/4 of the people affected are middle-class people. In New York, middle class is a higher income than other places because our expenses are so great, housing and everything else. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I was speaking to a community board. I try to speak to a lot of the community boards. I've spoken to a few in Rebecca's district. I was at a community board in Southeast Queens, middle-class African-American area, St. Albans, Rosedale, places like that. The first question they asked me is, get rid of the salt tax, big salt tax. So we're fighting to get it done, and I'm very hopeful we can.
Thank you, Senator. And the next question is going to come from the middle of the room. Matthew Katz, I see your hand up. Matthew Katz is a longtime resident of Roosevelt Island. He's a member of the Roosevelt Island Residents Association. Next to him is his wife, Sherry Hilsnack. So please, Matthew, you're up. 1 minute for your question and a 2-minute answer from the senator.
Democracy, so currently those are really under threat, and I think none of these local issues are going to matter if we don't live in a democracy anymore. So my concern is under the current status quo, essentially, there are a number of states where they're heavily gerrymandered, and essentially in the 2022 election, Democrats could win a large majority of the vote, and no one thinks that that would actually be enough to flip these legislatures. And then projecting further out from there, in the 2024 election, the Republican Party's gotten bolder in terms of embracing the big lie and embracing Trump, and there's a real danger that essentially, no matter what the outcomes in the actual votes in these states, that the gerrymandered legislatures are going to send alternative slates of electors to the Congress, right? And so essentially that's the track that we're currently on, that's the status quo. And so my question is, what legislatively, there's bills in the Senate to address that, but what's the prospect for those and what's going to be done to take us off this track we're headed on right now?
Right. Okay. So let me first say what you're saying is exactly on the money. Let me give you one little example. You were talking about gerrymandering. So in 2012, the Republican governor and Republican legislature of Wisconsin changed their lines around. Gerrymandering. In the recent election of 2020, 53% of the people who voted for the state assembly in Wisconsin voted Democratic. They have only 1/3 of the seats. So horribly was the gerrymander done. And this is being repeated over and over again. So there is a bill, it passed the House where they had a majority Democrat a few years ago, called HR 1, which dealt with all of these incursions on democracy. There would be nonpartisan commissions to deal with gerrymandering, so it would be right down the middle, not Democrat or Republican, but fair, and they wouldn't have these crazy looking districts. you know, it would be more geographically contiguous. We got rid of in that bill the dark money, all the dark money that floods into our politics. And maybe most importantly, we came in and set some federal standards for voting. The Republicans say that's unconstitutional. It is actually in the Constitution. Go look up, I think it's Article 1, I think it's Section 3. Congress shall control how there's voting in federal elections. It's very explicit. So, I get to choose as majority leader 10 top numbered bills. And S1 is HR, called the We the People Act. We have to pass that bill. We have to pass that bill. And there are a few, 49 of my 50 senators are co-sponsors of S1. Just one isn't, you know who it is, Joe Manchin. And so we went to Joe Manchin, we went to him and said, well, what do you believe in? Are you for voting rights? And he said, I am, but I'd like to do it in a bipartisan way. And of course, he wrote up a bill, which wasn't everything, but it kept the gerrymandering parts. It was 70% of what's in S1. And it got the support, I didn't support it yet because it's missing a few things I would like, but it got the support of Stacey Abrams and of Barack Obama, so it was a good bill. I went to Joe Manchin, I said, well, we believe in bipartisanship, let's see how many Republicans will vote for it. And in the Senate, there's this arcane process called the motion to proceed. That means you got permission to debate a bill and put it on the floor. And so I said on, I forgot the date now, I think it was June 19th, I'm going to have a motion to proceed vote. And we did. Guess how many Republicans voted even to debate? And I promised Joe Manchin we'd debate his bill. We could amend it, but his bill could be the base bill. Or I would make it in order as an amendment. No Republican voted for it. Zero. Not even to debate voting rights. So now, that was the opening gun. But now we are working and figuring out the best way that we can get this passed. We must pass it. We will pass it. We're working with all 50 of our senators to come up with a consensus, and we're going to get this done. And when people ask how, I said everything. Everything is on the table. We're going to figure it out. We must get it done. Thank you.
Assemblymember Seawright, thank you for recognizing me. I may have inadvertently raised my hand. My colleague, District Leader Alex Boris, I believe, has had a question. Would you mind if I tune the microphone?
Okay, the floor is yielded to Alex Boris, the newly elected district leader from the Upper East Side and a community activist. Alex Boris.
Thank you. That's a tough act to follow. Thank you, Jared. So along with being district leader, I also run a nonprofit that provides cybersecurity training. We actually did a session with the assembly member for the community, and in particular focused on threats to campaigns. So we provide our training completely for free. It's nonpartisan. It won't surprise you to know that more Democrats sign up for it than Republicans. You know, I focus a lot on the campaign side of it, and I'm actually speaking with the GAO later today on foreign threats that campaigns are facing. My question is on cybersecurity more broadly. There's a lot of relief that's going out now. We're rethinking the regulations that businesses face, and this is an intersection of national security with industry. There's definitely foreign pieces of defending from cybersecurity, but there's how do you provide businesses both the resources to take the threat seriously and the incentives to do things ahead of time to help protect Americans' data. So we'd love to think your thoughts on how we can help businesses and incentivize them to keep us safe.
Yeah, this is very, very important. First, you need to, part of incentivizing them is to let them go forward without being attacked for privacy or other types of considerations. And in the world that's constantly changing, technology is changing our world so dramatically in so many different ways, we have to do that. We have to have businesses want that. They've been afraid. They've also been afraid to communicate with the federal government and the Treasury Department when they get hacked because they're afraid their customers and everybody else. So we need protections in that regard as well. And so there are lots of different incentives. I'd be very interested, because I always learn from people who have on-the-ground experience, to give us some examples of what needs to be done. We did put about $4 billion into cybersecurity in the ARP bill, but a lot more has to be done in this regard. And here's the other dilemma, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So there are more and more of these attacks, ransomware and other kinds of attacks on our privacy and everything else. And they come from abroad. You know who is the best, who best knows how to defend against cybersecurity and attack those who do it? U.S. government, but not the whole U.S. government. The Defense Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the NSA are the best in the world at this. You may remember when they attacked that pipeline, they were able to shut it down and get 3/4 of the money back that the Colonial Pipeline, I think it was, had sent. This is now public in 2018, and I can't say about 2020. Do you know there was very little Russian interference in our election machinery and our election process in 2018 and 2020? Because in 2018, it's now not classified, so I can talk about it. I won't say anything about 2020. But the NSA attacked the IRA, which was the Russian agency that had done all that damage in 2016, and shut them down for 6 months. So we are great at this. Now here's the question. So with all this knowledge that has been built up in these agencies, why can't it be shared with the private sector so they can be more protected? And the answer is they're afraid if they share it, then the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese, who's ever doing this, will learn the secret sauce and it won't be good anymore. So we need a massive crash course to try and get them to figure out how they can both lend the expertise and not have it given away to the other side. And that's a mission that we have as well. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.